Minister of Youth and Young Adults for Mennonite Church USA and the editor of the Gathering Place website, which is an interactive website for Anabaptist youth leaders to learn, to be, and to connect. And you can connect with the Gathering Place community at www.thegatheringplace.us. This month, we have been talking about technology and its influence on our faith development. And it's no question that with social media and this digital age and the internet, that many of our youth are more connected than ever before, and that even us as youth leaders have more resources and tools that are available at our fingertips. But how are these advances in technology forming us? So, and how also, I think a good question to ask is, how are we discerning in our use and potential misuse of technology in the way we engage it with our ministry? So today I am absolutely thrilled to have Andy Brubacher Kaethler with us, who is Assistant Professor of Christian Formation and Culture at Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary in Elkhart, Indiana. As he's going to talk to us today about all of these things and a little bit more. So Andy, welcome to this webinar, and we are so thrilled to have you here. So are you ready to just jump on in and get us started?
You bet. Yeah, I'm ready.
Awesome.
Thank you, Rachel.
Good deal, for sure.
Yeah, so I first want to say that when I talk about technology, and especially using mediums or media of technology like we're doing right now to do about it, it feels a little bit odd, because I am able to see both the benefits and the drawbacks of using technology to communicate, both as Christians and just as humans. So I just kind of want to acknowledge up front that some of what I'm going to say will seem to be it'll seem odd that we're using this kind of medium to talk about these things, but I do think that they're things that are important to talk about, and I'm really glad to be able to spend this time with each of you. I know many of you in person, so it's good to see familiar faces, and I've met some new people today, so I hope there are many ongoing conversations. I want to start out just by saying that I became interested in technology back in the 1990s when I was a youth pastor in southern Ontario, and this was back in the days before the World Wide Web. And some of the youth in our church were hanging out on bulletin board services, so this is way before graphical interfaces, just totally text interfaces. They'd hang out in groups, and they'd start chatting with friends locally, and they'd invite them to church, and they'd invite them to youth group. And so these kids were showing up who had not even met the friends who invited them in person. And I thought, wow, this is an amazing kind of tool for outreach and evangelism. Many of these kids that came from broken homes or homes that weren't very stable. And so coming to youth group was kind of a safe place for them to be on a Friday night. In those days, we had weekly Friday night youth group meetings. And so this was this really neat opportunity, and I was really excited about this. Not too long after that, by the kind of mid to late 90s, was when the World Wide Web developed and became more popular, and graphical interfaces became more popular, and so then we started to see problems arising as well with things like pornography and video game addictions, not just amongst the youth, but amongst families and parents as well, who were just really excited about this new way of communicating and connecting, and it was having some negative effects on other relationships in the family and the church. And so right there, very early on, I began to see that technology gives us something, and technology takes some things away. We can do things with it, and it undoes some things. And so we need to be very discerning as Christians about how we use it. In terms of an introduction to my family, my wife is a public school teacher, and in her school is known as one of the fastest or quickest adopters of new technology in the classroom. So she's, fully utilizes smart boards and things like that. And so we have lots of conversations at home about these kinds of things. I have 2 teenage daughters as well. And so this is like a regular daily conversation at our home is, what's a good use of technology? Is there a good use of technology? How does it help relationships and learning? How does it hinder? Those kinds of things. So I want you guys to know that this is for me an ongoing conversation, and I never tire of it because I think it's so important. I call myself a bit of a chastened Luddite, and the reason I don't Luddite has a negative connotation in our day and age, mostly as people who are afraid of technology or afraid of change. If you know the story of Luddites, Luddites were British workers back in the 1700s, 1800s, who went around smashing and breaking the new machines for weaving cloth. So as new technologies were developed, they were more efficient, and they displaced a lot of workers from their jobs. It used to be that cloth making was a kind of a cottage industry. Lower middle class people could have looms in their homes, and they would weave clothing. And with new technology, factories were developing, and so you needed fewer people to run bigger machines to make more cloth, and many people were put out of work. So they went around smashing these new looms so that they could get their old jobs back. And so that's why it has a negative connotation. The Luddites are often seen as being people who are violent. So I'm a chastened Luddite in the fact that I don't want to take on the violent bits. But what I appreciate about the Luddites is that they had this sense that technological change has a social impact. And sometimes it can, maybe in the short term, maybe in the long term, negatively impact people's economic lives, social lives, things like that. In capitalist theory, economics, the Luddite fallacy developed then to show that, well, the Luddites were wrong in saying that machines simply displaced them, because there were new jobs that were created to run these machines, and the more people the cheaper products were, the more people would consume, and the more we needed people to run the machines to make the products that we would consume. And I think that's probably kind of worked for the last couple hundred years, but I think we're kind of with the environmental crisis, with problems of overconsumption, waste, things like that. I think we're beginning to see the end of the Luddite fallacy and the beginning of the Luddite fallacy. But I will leave it at that. Anyway, so I'm happy to be called a chastened Luddite, if by that it means not being violent, and it means thinking critically about the effects of changes in technological practices in our culture. I'm a teacher, I'm an academic, and so one of the things that I think it's important to do to begin with is just to talk a little bit about what we mean by technology. And so often when we're talking about youth and technology, we're talking a lot about gadgets and tools and devices, social media, things like that. And those are definitely very important things in our lives today, and these are expressions of technology. My basic understanding of technology is a little bit broader than that. In fact, I would define technology as anything that is an extension of a human capacity or a human ability. So I'm wearing contacts. Contacts are a form of technology. They're an extension of my eyes. I'm using a headset, which is an extension of my mouth and of my ears. I'm wearing clothing, which is an extension of my skin. We're communicating via the internet, which is an extension of our neurological system on computers, which are an extension of our brain, things like that. So most technologies, and I can't think of any one that isn't simply an extension of some kind of human capacity. So it's a way, in theological terms, I would say, of overcoming some of our human limits. Our senses are limited by time and space and things like that. And so one definition of technology is that it just extends our human capacity to do something. Cars are an extension of our legs, bicycles, things like that. So we can keep going along that way. And technology has been with us ever since we've been humans. Ever since we've had language, we've always been tool makers and tool users. So that's not what's new. I think what is new is, especially beginning in the 1800s, we began to develop technologies that were not powered by human or mammal power. right? So the development of electricity, the development of coal, things like that, all of a sudden allowed us to do more things, to do them more efficiently or quicker, using a power that didn't just come from our own muscles and our own bodies or from the animals that were in our lives. And I think this changed things an awful lot. And most of the things we take for granted now, like the internet, email, things like that, actually the seeds of those changes began in the late 1800s already, with the invention of the telegraph, of the photograph, of electricity, those kinds of things. So it's taken almost a century for the logic of these things to kind of come full circle, be full blown in our lives. So anyway, so technology, we often talk about gadgets, and we need to, but just so you know that I crouch it in something much bigger and much larger, something that is kind of, that humans have naturally been drawn towards, and we've used to overcome problems and limits in our lives. And I want to do a little bit of a theological and biblical analysis of that in a little bit. The next thing I want to say about technology and what I mean by technology is that there are at least three, that's putting it simply, but there's at least three views on technology. The first view is, I think, the most common one in our world, and that is technology is neutral. So technology is neutral, which means that it is neither good nor bad. It gets used for good things when good people use it to do good things, and it gets used for bad things when bad people use it to do bad things. So if I were a dead German philosopher, I would like to talk about hammers, because for some reason dead German philosophers are enamored with hammers. And so a dead German philosopher would say a hammer is a neutral technology. It does not tell you whether you should use it to build a house or to bash somebody's head in. A good person will use it to build a house. A bad person will use it to bash somebody's head in. But the hammer doesn't tell you what to do with that. So this is the neutral view of technology. I'm getting some feedback there. Is that coming from you, Bob? Hey, Bob, do you know how to turn off your the microphone on your computer? Okay. So that's the first view, the technology neutral view. The second is the substantivist view, meaning that technology is itself kind of a substance or a life form, and it shapes us as well. So, you know, Winston Churchill said, "We make our buildings, and then our buildings make us." Or other people have said, you know, we make our tools and then our tools make us. So it's emphasizing the last part, that once we use a building or use a tool, we shape it, but then it shapes us in ways that we don't always perceive of at the beginning or imagine at the beginning, because we can't imagine all the possibilities. So with the hammer thing, the substantivist view of technology would say that a hammer is not neutral. With a hammer in my hand, the whole world is a nail. So my identity becomes that of a hammer holder and a hitter. And when we have a hammer in our hand, we go around looking for things to hit. And actually, I mean, this is kind of true in my home. Every once in a while, I'll get the hammer out to fix something in the house, and then I walk around the house looking for other little things to fix while I have it out, because I have this hammer in my hand and I just want to keep using it. So that's the substantivist view, and people who take that view tend to have a much more negative view of technology, because they realize that technology changes us and shapes us in ways that we seldom anticipate, and in ways that are not always positive. And then the third view would be kind of a pluralistic view.
Or anyone else?
I have a closing statement, but I'd like to hear some closing thoughts from others first.
I'm just intrigued by this idea of identity formation, particularly for adolescents. And I know we won't have time to address it here, but just in terms of we're thinking about how our youth form identities and what social media is doing there and how it enhances and it takes away some things. Youth kind of curate their identities on social media, sometimes in sometimes good ways, sometimes harmful ways, and so they're able to form horizontal identities much easier than previous generations, I think, in terms of finding their identities through social media, whereas previously it was mostly through vertical, through our parents, communities that were physically present. Now it's much broader, so it goes out horizontally. So yeah, I'm just kind of curious to see how that develops.
Well, sensing that this minute is probably getting close to being up, my conclusion or kind of closing statement is that I firmly believe, especially as a Christian, that the future spiritual, emotional, relational, and physical health of all humanity, not just Christians, and in fact the health of creation as a whole, rests largely on our ability as Christians and as a species to disengage from many technological practices. There is no technological panacea, no technological solution. We can't efficientize our way out of our current crises, relational, environmental crises. What we need to reclaim and celebrate is our God-given human limits of being created in time and in place and in bodies, and seeing these as things not to be overcome. They're not problems, the result of the fall. These are gifts of the garden. And I think as long as we're trying to overcome those as limits, I think we're going to keep looking for the technological solution. And I think the solution is a theological one, and that is just kind of returning to who we are as daughters and sons of God, beloved by God, created in the image of God.
Well, thank you so much, Andy, for being with us here today and giving us discernment, I think, about what does it mean to see how technology has always been there. This is not a new thing. Technology has been there from the beginning of time, but how are we able to discern the use of this technology that's available to us as, like you said, as we engage in the gifts and embrace these gifts of body, space, and time. So thanks so much. And there's opportunity to continue the practical aspect of what does this actually look like, contextualized, and how do we now take this, what Andy has so nicely laid out as a discernment process, to our youth ministry. And our learning circle is going to be September 22nd from 1 to 2 p.m. where we can talk informally with one another about the so what. So how do we actually help this discernment process happen in our own churches? So feel free to sign up to join that conversation. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for all of you to take the time out of your day today to join in this conversation. So may you be blessed, and we will connect again. So thanks, Andy, and goodbye, everyone else. Thanks.
Good to be with you all. Bye.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Andy.
Bye. Sure thing.